ready one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel and welcome back to Can You Forgive Steve Donoghue? Part 2 of the read-along for Anthony Trollope's wonderful novel, Can You Forgive Her? I'm enjoying it probably more than any of the other Trollope novels that I've read, to the point where I'm ready to declare that Anthony Trollope is my favorite Victorian novelist. I think I would have said George Eliot was, but I think he has displaced her. I love this novel. It's fascinating. I thought that Lady Glen Cora's comment to Alice was apt, certainly thematically, resonant with all the love plots going on and raveling and unraveling here. She says, "It is better to have a false husband than to be a false wife." Certainly Alice, at varying points in and amongst all of her changes of mind, seems to at least sometimes believe that. I finally gave up on George Vavasor. I've been kind of holding up that he might be a good guy, and I still think that there might be some kind of redemption coming, but maybe that's just my sunny, optimistic, naive personality. But I still remember how he got the scar and what he was doing when he was a child, and I've kind of held on to that kernel that there is something that's not totally evil about him. But I certainly washed my hands of him in the novel with that horrible proposal letter. "If you were my wife tomorrow, I should expect to use your money, if it were needed, in struggling to obtain a seat in Parliament and a hearing there. I will hardly stoop to tell you that I do not ask you to be my wife for the sake of this aid. But if you were to become my wife, I should expect all your cooperation. With your money, possibly, but certainly with your warmest spirit." Well, as he is soon to find out, he can't have both. She's only offering one of those two. I was frustrated with Alice for accepting such a bland, horrible proposal, but she asks for the same 12 months that she had asked for with Grey, but that her money would be available to him in the interim. Now, I really hated George when he tossed her letter aside, that carelessly. He's on my shit list. But Alice is just confounding him. As I said in week 1, she's not lovable, but I am just fascinated for her, and you know, she is the heroine. I'm rooting for her. I thought the old Squire Vavasor was really colorful and interesting. Got to know him and his quirky, vain ways. And I think the dynamic between Alice and her father is getting more interesting. Like, I don't think Mr. Vavasor, Alice's father, is a complete write-off. In the conversations that she has with him, she acknowledges her indecision, which we don't really see until he kind of drags it out of her, that she's not as sure about George as she first indicated. And then chapter 35 is called Passion versus Prudence, and that could be the title of the novel. I was just chilled by the way she viscerally shrank from George. As much as I had washed my hands of him, I could certainly, like, it was a chilly reception. That was a fascinating chapter. But, and all of that just wound up the theme here of the inseparability of money and love and sexuality, but especially money and love. And I mean, that's Trollope's theme. The way that he is orchestrating his plot to make that so inextricable is just fascinating. So then John Grey rushes in and Alice feels a thrill. Where was her thrill with him before? But she feels a visceral sexual thrill that she hadn't felt with George. And then the conspiracy with Mr. Vavasor and Grey. I think Mr. Vavasor, he's kind of rising to the occasion. But I can't put my finger on it, but there was something vaguely Shakespearean about their plot. Mr. Grey and Mr. Vavasor, it's just kind of rang some Shakespearean bells in my mind, but I haven't read Shakespeare or really cared to for years. But then that resonated with Alice, who's not aware of their conspiracy, but she has the same thought. She admits to herself that she's hoping George will just take her money over the next 12 months, squander it, and then she won't have to marry him. So then George goes to Shap, and old Squire Vavasor's wondering why Kate's going to Shap because there's no shops in Shap. I love that line. Kate is more complex. I'm interested in Kate. I don't see that she's a bad, malignant character so far. I thought her reaction to George wanting Alice's money, and even to Alice intending to offer her money to George before the wedding, but especially to her brother who she idolizes, her reaction to George taking Alice up on her offer of dipping into her nest egg before the wedding, she really disapproves of that, and I thought that was fascinating. And then we go back to the laughable love triangle between Aunt Greenough, Mr. Cheeseacre, and Captain Belfield. And really that's my favorite part of this novel. That and the Duchess of Bungay. I'm enjoying all of it, but the comic plot is just to die for. To me, it's an echo, a comedic echo of all the love money plots in the more serious parts of the novel. So it's not just there for comic relief. I'm going to read you a lengthy passage, and you've all read it, but I just want to read it anyway. I love this passage describing Aunt Greenough when she has the two gentlemen to dinner, and all of their squabbling and one-upmanship and rivalry is just a delight. But this long paragraph about her outfit and all of the sexuality that's imbued into how she wears what she wears, and as a set piece, I think this is just wonderful. The widow was almost gorgeous in her weeds. I believe that she had not sinned in her dress against any of those canons which the semi-ecclesiastical authorities on widowhood have laid down as to the outward garments fitted for gentlemen's relics. The materials were those which are devoted to the deepest conjugal grief. As regarded every item of the written law, her suite worship was carried out to the letter. There was the widow's cap, generally so hideous, so well known to the eyes of all men, so odious to womanhood. Let us hope that such headgear may have some assuaging effect on the departed spirits of husbands. There was the dress of deep, clinging, melancholy crape, of crape which becomes so brown and so rusty, and which makes the 6 months' widow seem so much more afflicted a creature than she whose husband is just gone, and whose crape is therefore new. There were the trailing weepers, and the widow's kerchief, pinned close round her neck, and somewhat tightly over her bosom. But there was that of genius about Mrs. Greenough, that she had turned every seeming disadvantage to some special profit, and had so dressed herself that though she had obeyed the law to the letter, she had thrown the spirit of it to the winds. Her cap sat jauntily on her head, and showed just so much of her rich brown hair as to give her the appearance of youth which she desired. Cheeseacre had blamed her in his heart for her private carriage, but she spent more money, I think, on new crape than she did on her broom. It never became brown and rusty with her, or formed itself into old lumpy folds, or shaped itself round her like a grave cloth. The written law had not interdicted crinoline, and she loomed as large with weeds, which with her were not sombre, as she would do with her silks when the period of her probation should be over. Her weepers were bright with newness, and she would waft them aside from her shoulder with an air which turned even them into auxiliaries. Her kerchief was fastened close round her neck, and close over her bosom, but Jeanette well knew what she was doing as she fastened it, and so did Jeanette's mistress. So, as Steve has talked about both last week and this weekend, maybe I mentioned it last week too, but I mean just the manipulativeness of Mrs. Greenough and her widowhood and her taunting and toying with these two gentlemen callers, that description is one of my favorite quotes. And the twinges of sexuality. So we had Alice's thrill with Mr. Grey standing closer. I think he kind of touched her hand or something, and she went ooh internally. And then Mrs. Greenough at this crazy dinner party, looking at the photo albums of her dead husband with Captain Belfield with interlocked fingers. Yeah, sexuality is really interesting. I can't remember sexuality so much in other Trollope novels I've read. Probably was there, but I think it's really interesting. Getting more and more interesting here. And at the very end of this chunk, Greenough finally tells Mr. Cheesacre off and says, "And look here, Mr. Cheesacre, if it should ever come to pass that you are making love to a lady in earnest—" "I couldn't be more in earnest," said he. "That you are making love to a lady in earnest, talk to her a little more about your passion and a little less about your purse. Now, good night." And again, in a very comical way, that echoes the whole love-money conundrum that is playing out in the relationships of all these characters. Those are my comments about what struck me. I'm looking forward to watching all the rest of you with your reaction videos, and I'm looking forward to getting into part 3 this week. So, thanks for watching.